There are 3 days each year that stir something deep in a child, waking them with an excitement that no other day can match. Their birthday, Christmas, and the first day of summer. Each holds an eerie promise, like the calm before a storm, the possibilities stretching out like shadows. Today was Todd's first day of summer. The sun hung heavy in the sky, and the clouds peeled away, revealing a cold, unsettling blue above. The kind of sky that seemed too perfect, like a painted canvas hiding something darker beneath. Todd, all of 14, sprang from his bed, moving faster than any boy his age should. His movements felt too eager, too desperate, like he needed to outrun something lurking behind him. He dashed down the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, the sound of his feet echoing through the empty house. It felt hollow, as if it were holding its breath. He skidded to a halt just outside the kitchen, his head poking around the doorway. There they were. His parents, sitting just as they always did, locked in the suffocating monotony of their routine. Mom set the table, the clink of plates a little too loud in the silence. Dad sat behind his newspaper, the thin crinkle of the pages sending shivers up Todd's spine. They always did this every single morning, but today, something felt off. "Breakfast is ready, sweetie. Come downstairs." His mother's voice rang out. It was wrong, though. How had she not heard him pounding down the stairs just moments before? "I'm right here, Mom," Todd replied, stepping into the room, the air around him thick and stale. "Wash your hands first, honey." Her voice was soft but firm, carrying an unsettling undercurrent. "But I just woke up, and they're not dirty," Todd protested. But before his mother could answer, a slow rustle of the newspaper came from the table. "Do as your mother says," came his father's voice, low and detached, like it wasn't even his own. Todd sulked to the sink, rinsing his hands under icy water that felt far colder than it should have. His hands trembled, but not from the cold. Something gnawed at him, something he couldn't place. After breakfast, Todd hurried to leave, desperate to escape the strange weight pressing down on the house. But just as he reached the door, his mother's voice stopped him again. "Todd, before you go, could you find Grandma's dinner set in the basement? The O'Briens are coming tonight, and I need it set out." The basement. Todd froze. Of all the places in the house, the basement was the one he avoided. Dark, damp, and filled with forgotten things, it had a presence, a lurking heaviness. But there was no escaping it now. Reluctantly, Todd made his way toward the door. He stood at the top of the stairs, the open door revealing nothing but a yawning darkness below. For a moment, he considered refusing, but something pulled him forward, almost against his will. He descended slowly, each creak of the stairs like the groan of something deep beneath the earth. The basement was just as he remembered, cold, shadowy, filled with boxes stacked in crooked piles. Dust hung in the air, swirling in the single thin beam of light that trickled through the cracked window. The room felt like a tomb, a graveyard of forgotten memories. Todd began searching for the box labeled Grandma's dinner set, his movements slow and hesitant. But as he moved through the clutter, something strange caught his eye: a door. Just a simple wooden door, but one Todd had never noticed before. It stood at the far end of the room, half hidden behind a stack of old crates. It seemed wrong somehow. Todd couldn't explain it, but something about it made his skin crawl. It was just a door, like any other, yet the longer he stared at it, the more it seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. He couldn't tear his eyes away. The more he looked, the more the door seemed to grow, to twist in his vision, becoming something almost alive. His heart pounded in his chest, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He had never seen this door before, of that he was certain. And yet, it had always been there. The door sat in the back corner of the basement, nestled in the crook of the wall, just below the cracked window. It didn't belong. Todd knew that. It made no sense for there to be a door there. For one, the wall it was built into led straight into dirt, earth, and roots. There was no door in their backyard, no bulkhead. And yet, here it was, standing impossibly in a place it shouldn't be. Todd had never seen this door before, yet it tugged at something deep in his gut, something primal. Without thinking, driven by a pull he didn't understand, Todd walked straight for the door. His hand wrapped around the knob, it was ice cold. The chill bit into his skin, but with his heart pounding and adrenaline surging, he barely noticed. With a deep breath, he braced himself and pulled. The door swung open, and Todd expected light to flood the basement, maybe dirt, maybe air, but instead, there was nothing. No light, no dust, nothing. What stretched beyond the threshold was a void, pure and absolute, true darkness. The kind that keeps children awake at night, staring wide-eyed into the corners of their rooms, convinced something waits for them just beyond sight. Todd's skin prickled, his breath hitching in his throat. The cold from the darkness seeped into him, creeping up his arms, his legs, clawing its way into his chest. He slammed the door shut, his heart racing faster than before, and bolted upstairs. He ran past the hallway, out the front door, and into the yard, gasping for air. It took a moment for Todd to realize where he was, to make sense of what he was seeing. He spun around, staring at the side of his house. There was no door, just a solid wall of siding, as there always had been. Todd forced himself to breathe, his pulse slowly steadying. It was just your imagination, he told himself. Just a stupid trick of the mind. Resolved to put it all behind him, he walked back into the house. He still needed to find Grandma's dinner set. He took the stairs down into the basement, one slow step at a time, convincing himself it was all over. But when he reached the landing, he froze. The door was still there. Worse, it stood wide open, yawning into the void, the darkness beyond seeming to beckon him. An unsettling, almost malicious invitation. Todd had slammed it shut, he was sure of it. His breath hitched, but something deeper inside him tugged again. Humans are creatures of morbid curiosity after all. Just like sniffing week-old leftovers, even when you know they've gone bad. You can't help but check. Against every instinct, Todd stepped closer. He edged toward the gaping doorway, his body moving on its own. He peered inside and immediately noticed something new, the faint outline of stairs leading downward into the black. Stone stairs, crumbling and ancient, descending far deeper than his basement should have allowed. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense, but he stepped through. One step at a time, Todd descended into the depths, the stone walls closing in on him. The air was thick, heavy, and cold. He could feel the darkness pressing against his skin, tighter with each step. He paused for a moment and glanced back. The door was still visible, now only 10 feet above him. But the further he moved, the darker it became. The light from the basement above was growing dimmer, fainter, swallowed by the darkness that wrapped itself around him like an icy blanket. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but Todd couldn't stop. He didn't know why, but he kept walking, each footfall soft and tentative, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. He tried to make sense of it, to reason with himself, but nothing added up. He had always been sharp, quick to figure things out. But this was beyond understanding. He turned again. The door was now a distant memory, floating impossibly high above him, as if suspended in a dream. The stairs beneath him stretched downward into nothingness. The darkness was growing thicker, almost tangible, pressing against him, consuming him. And still, he walked deeper into the abyss, hoping, praying, that an explanation would come. But the only thing that greeted him was more silence, and the blackness that continued to swallow him whole. As Todd descended, the faint light from the doorway above slowly faded, swallowed by the growing darkness. Every step he took made it harder to turn back. He wondered if now was the time to retreat, to erase this bizarre moment from his mind, when suddenly, he heard something ahead, a faint sound. The soft clatter of a pebble falling in the silence, echoing through the darkness like a distant whisper. Despite the dread pooling in his stomach, curiosity tugged at him once more, pulling him forward. As he pressed on, his eyes began to adjust. What had once been solid stone walls pressing close on either side now opened into something much larger, a cavernous tunnel. The walls fell away, revealing a yawning cave. The ceiling loomed high above, stalactites jutting out in twisted shapes, some impossibly large, others small and jagged, like teeth gnashing down from the shadows. It was beautiful in a cold, eerie way, an unsettling beauty that felt almost ancient and forbidden. Todd sat down on the steps, bewildered by the immensity of it all. Time felt strange here, warped and stretched in the dark. He had no idea how long he sat there, staring into the stillness. Minutes, hours, he couldn't tell. The quiet wrapped around him like a thick blanket, and his thoughts began to blur, as if the darkness was leeching something from him. He felt drowsy, his mind hazy and slow, when suddenly he heard it again, the faint sound of a pebble tumbling somewhere ahead. Todd looked up, squinting into the gloom, and that's when he saw them. What he had mistaken for stalactites, those jagged, ominous shapes hanging from the ceiling and clinging to the walls, were not stalactites at all. Hundreds of hollow, empty eyes stared down at him, black and soulless. The rock formations weren't just misshapen. They resembled heads, twisted and deformed, each with deep, empty sockets where eyes should have been. It was as if the cave itself was alive, watching him with an eerie, silent intensity. Todd froze, his breath caught in his throat, horror washing over him in cold waves. The eyes didn't blink, didn't move, but they seemed to bore into him, their empty gaze pulling him into the abyss. In a panic, he shot to his feet, his heart hammering in his chest. Without thinking, he turned and bolted, flying up the steps, his feet barely touching the ground as he sprinted toward the door. He didn't look back, terrified that if he did, those eyes, those horrible, empty eyes would follow. The stairwell stretched before him, an endless climb, but Todd didn't stop. His legs burned as he ran, skipping steps in his frantic flight. His breath came in ragged gasps and his heart pounded in his ears. He kept his eyes down, afraid to trip, afraid of what might be watching from the shadows. The faster he ran, the further away the door seemed, as if the stairs were pulling him deeper, not closer to escape. Finally, he dared to glance up, and there was no door. Just endless stairs, spiraling upward into nothingness. Panic gripped him as his foot caught on something. He tripped, falling hard, the world spinning as everything went black. Todd woke up screaming, his heart still racing, drenched in sweat. It was morning. Sunlight streamed softly through his bedroom window. He blinked, disoriented, his pulse still pounding in his ears. It was just a dream. Just a nightmare, his mind's twisted creation. He sat up in bed, trying to shake off the lingering fear, but something felt off. He looked down and noticed he was still wearing the clothes from the dream, the same ones he'd worn during that awful descent into the dark. I must have fallen asleep in them, he told himself, shaking his head. Dismissing the unease clawing at his gut, Todd got out of bed and made his way downstairs, just like any other morning. His parents were already in the kitchen, his mother busy at the counter, his father reading the newspaper as usual. The familiar routine washed over him, comforting in its predictability. He stepped into the kitchen, relieved. Everything was normal. Nothing had changed. But just as he was about to sit down, he heard it again, a faint sound behind him. The unmistakable sound of a pebble falling. Todd turned slowly, his breath catching in his throat. He glanced toward the living room and saw the TV on, playing some documentary about underground caves. He laughed nervously. It was just the TV, just some sound effect. He shook his head, feeling silly. But when he turned back toward the kitchen, his heart stopped. His mother had turned to face him, and his father had lowered the newspaper. They were both staring at him. Their eyes, those eyes were empty pits, darker than night, black voids that seemed to suck all the light from the room. They stared without blinking, hollow and soulless, just like the eyes in the cave. Todd couldn't breathe. The kitchen spun around him, the air thick and cold, as the world collapsed into darkness. Todd tumbled into those black voids, falling endlessly, spiraling deeper into the darkness. The sensation was unbearable, like sinking through thick, freezing air, his body weightless yet pulled by an unseen force. His heart pounded louder with every second, the fear clawing at him, tearing his mind apart. And then, with a sickening, wet crunch, Todd hit the cavern floor. His bones crumpled beneath the weight of his fall, the impact sending shockwaves through his small, broken body. The sound echoed in the vast, silent chamber, damp and hollow, like a death knell. Above him, they watched. Countless empty eyes, black, dead, and unblinking, bored down on him from every crevice of the cave. Even in death, Todd could feel their gaze, their cold, relentless stare penetrating his lifeless form. His body twitched, once, twice, jerking violently, as though his nerves were still firing in some final, pitiful protest. But soon, even that ceased. Todd lay still. Yet the eyes, those terrible, soulless eyes, never looked away. They remained fixed on his broken body, as if feeding off the stillness, the silence, the end. Even the dead ones stared on, trapped forever in a gaze that no longer needed to see to watch.